Chapter 7. The Phantom Ship. The fog was thick when they found it. The coastline was supposed to be beautiful, an untouched stretch of beach framed by jagged cliffs and the wild, crashing waves of the ocean. For Sarah, Jake, and their two friends, Mark and Emily, it was the perfect spot for a weekend getaway. A hike, a few days of camping, and maybe a campfire by the shore. They were looking forward to the solitude, the quiet, and the beauty of the ocean at sunset. What they didn't expect was to stumble across the remnants of something old, something that should have been forgotten. It started with an old, rusting structure barely visible through the dense fog that rolled in like a creeping tide. "What's that?" Mark asked, squinting toward the shoreline. "Probably an old shipwreck," Jake said casually, his voice muffled by the wind. "You can see pieces of it sticking out from the rocks." The group made their way toward it, intrigued. The ship's remains were hidden just out of sight from the main trail, lodged at the edge of the cliff, partially submerged in the crashing waves below. The ship had long since been overtaken by the ocean, its once proud hull now decaying, its sides covered with barnacles and seaweed, and its mast broken and twisted. "Who would have thought a shipwreck would be here?" Emily said, her voice filled with wonder. "It doesn't look like a normal wreck, though. There's something strange about it." Sarah stepped closer, her eyes scanning the hull, and noticed something unsettling. The wood didn't look quite like the weathered driftwood they had expected. It was darker, almost blackened, and its edges were smooth in a way that suggested they hadn't been worn down by the sea. She ran her fingers over it, feeling a strange vibration in the air, a subtle hum, like the ship was alive in some way. "Maybe it's an old naval ship or a cargo ship," Sarah suggested. "Probably just something abandoned over 100 years ago." But as they crept closer, the truth became undeniable. The shape was off. The proportions of the ship were wrong, too wide, too long. The wood of the ship, though old, seemed almost too well preserved. The eerie, dark markings along its edges seemed unnatural, as if carved by something that wasn't human. The rusting, twisted iron on the deck gleamed strangely in the dying light of the day. "I don't like this," Sarah muttered, her unease growing by the second. "Come on, we're almost there. It's just a shipwreck. What's the worst that could happen?" They continued exploring the wreck, stepping over broken pieces of wood and the detritus scattered around the deck. The air grew heavier, thicker, as if the fog itself was moving in closer. It wasn't the salty mist of the sea. It felt dense, like it was trying to close in on them, to suffocate them. "Let's head back," Sarah said suddenly. "This place is creeping me out." "Relax. Let's just take a few more minutes to check it out. It's not every day you find something like this." As the group moved deeper into the wreck, the sky overhead darkened more rapidly than expected. The wind had shifted, pushing the fog inland with greater force. The light was fading, but what struck Sarah was the coldness in the air, a bone-deep chill that had settled around them. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below seemed muffled, like it was coming from a distance. "Okay, I think that's enough," Mark said suddenly, his voice tense. "It's getting late. Let's head back to the campsite." They turned, but as they did, the ground beneath their feet seemed to shift. The ship creaked unnaturally, a groan that came from the very bones of the wreck. Sarah felt that hair on the back of her neck stand up. "What the hell was that?" Emily whispered, looking around nervously. Before anyone could answer, the ship seemed to lurch, as though it was rising from the depths, its massive hull shifting against the cliffside. The vibrations beneath their feet were no longer a faint hum. They were loud and unmistakable. The ground shook violently, and the ship groaned again, louder, deeper this time, as though some immense force was waking from its slumber. "Get out, now!" Sarah screamed, panic surging through her as she turned and ran. The others didn't hesitate. They sprinted toward the cliffside, the ground trembling beneath them. But as they approached the edge of the shipwreck, something broke through the surface of the water below, something massive and inhuman. The first creature emerged with horrifying speed, rising from the depths like a phantom, its long skeletal limbs dragging through the seaweed and wreckage. It was hominoid in shape, but its body was covered in strange, slimy black scales, and its eyes glowed an unnatural, eerie green. Its head was distorted, almost featureless, save for its glowing eyes and a mouth that stretched too wide to be human. "Run!" Jake shouted, but it was already too late. The creature's shrill, otherworldly screech echoed through the air, and suddenly more figures rose from the sea. The wreck was no longer just a ship. It was a staging ground for the undead alien invaders that had been lying in wait for centuries. Their bodies were covered in waterlogged uniforms, dark and tattered, and their twisted forms clawed their way onto the shore. "There's too many of them," Mark shouted as the creatures slowly advanced, their glowing eyes fixed on the group. One of the creatures lunged at them, its bony arms outstretched. Sarah barely managed to dodge, but the creature's fingers brushed against her shoulder, leaving a cold, burning sensation where it touched. The world seemed to spin as Sarah's mind went numb. Her thoughts were scattered, her body freezing from the touch, and something dark began to stir in her chest. She staggered again, fighting to hold on to her control, but the coldness from the creature's touch spread through her veins like poison. "Don't let them touch you," Jake shouted as he grabbed her arm, pulling her back. They ran through the jungle, the wrecked ship and the creatures fading into the distance, but Sarah's legs felt heavy, her body sluggish. Her mind was clouded by something that wasn't her own, something that wanted to take over. The touch of the creature had infected her, and she could feel it, crawling inside her like a poison. She staggered again, falling to her knees as a wave of dizziness washed over her. "Come on," Mark shouted, but his voice was far away, fading like a distant echo. And then it happened. The ground beneath her shook again, and she saw them, hundreds of the alien invaders emerging from the wreck. They weren't just rising from the sea anymore, they were everywhere. They crawled from the jungle, from the cliffs, from beneath the earth itself, their hollow eyes fixed on her, and she realized with sudden horror that they weren't hunting her anymore. They were after all of them. In a panic, she grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him away from the group as they ran. But as they reached the edge of the clearing, Sarah's vision blurred. She could feel the touch of the creature again, a force crawling into her mind, pushing her thoughts aside. She screamed, but the sound was muffled by the overwhelming presence inside her mind. The others didn't even notice as Sarah suddenly turned toward the oncoming swarm. The voice inside her mind was no longer a whisper, it was a command. She wasn't herself anymore. She was part of them. The last thing she heard was Jake's desperate scream as he realized what had happened, but it was already too late. The undead alien invaders had already claimed her. The sun rose the next morning, and the jungle was eerily still. The campfire had long since died out, and the clearing was silent. The wrecked ship still loomed on the cliff, as if waiting for its next victims. Jake, Mark, and Emily had escaped, barely. They had outrun the swarm, but not without scars. As they reached the nearest town, they turned back one last time. The fog had settled, and everything seemed quiet again. But Sarah was gone, and they knew, no matter how far they ran, it was only a matter of time before the creatures returned. They were never truly alone anymore. The swarm was spreading, and the world would never be the same again.
Thank you for listening to this story. Your support means a lot and helps keep these tales coming. If you enjoyed it, please take a moment to subscribe and follow for more dark and immersive stories just like this one. New horrors await. Don't miss what's coming next.